Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, and if you're a new subscriber, hi. So in today's tutorial, I'll be taking us on how I made this jumpsuit without a waist joining. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The first thing I'm going to do is to mark 3 inches all the way down on the pattern paper, and that will serve as the center front line. And every measurement which we'll be taking also will be starting from that line. Over there, from their point, I went ahead to mark my shoulder divided by 2. I took my shoulder slope of 1, then I marked down my chest line from that point. So after doing that, I went ahead to label the line as the chest line. Then I took my shoulder measurement also at that point, and I connected it to the first shoulder measurement. I went ahead to mark my shoulder to nipple of 9.5. And also mark my shoulder to waist of 16 inches. Then I also took my hip measurement, my hip line measurement of 24.5. From the waistline, I went ahead to mark my crotch depth. So to get the crotch depth over here, I used my hip measurement divided by 4. So from that point, I went down by 1.5 inches for ease. You can actually do one, but I decided to use 1.5 inches. So that will serve as the crotch line. Alright, so on the chest line now, I went ahead to take my bust divided by 4. Then here, I'm just marking out my armhole. Alright, so after this, I went to the waistline to take my waist measurements plus 1 inch for that. I took my hip measurements also on the hip line. Then I connected them together. So the next thing I'll be doing is to mark my dart out. So I took my nipple to nipple measurement divided by 2. I went ahead to mark that out on my pattern. Then I'm going to roll that out. Then I took my dart divided by 2 on both sides of the line, and I took 5 inches up above the waistline and 6 inches below the waistline. Then I connected those lines together. Okay, so when I was done doing that, I went to my bust line to mark my nipple to nipple also at that point. Then here I took my bust dart of 1.5 inches. Then I connected it to the bust point. Okay, so here I'm going to take my hip measurement and divide it by 4 to get my crotch extension. So I divided my hip measurement over there by 4. So it gave me 2.25. Then I added 0.25 also for ease. And I went to connect it back to my hip line. Now to know how you're going to be connecting it, just take the measurement you have over there. Take the measurement you have on the crotch extension here and divide it by 2. So I have 2.5 divided by 2 is 1.25. As you can see, it's directly on the 1.25. So that's how you get the curve for that point. Now on the crotch extension, I inputted my thigh measurement divided by 2. So from this point over here, you're going to take your thigh measurement divided by 2, then I added ease of 0.5 inches, connected it back to the hip line. Then here I took the length of the jumpsuit, or should I say play suit. So I took the length of my play suit and I rolled that out. Then divided everything I have on the crotch line by 2 to get the midpoint. So whatever I have over there, I took it down to the length of the jumpsuit which I want, just to get a straight line, because we'll be dividing this now into 2. So I'm going to go ahead and label this as the mid thigh. Then I connected the points like so. Now over here, my mid thigh measurements, I divided it by 2. So I'm working with 18 inches. So I divided that 18 inches by 2. Then I marked it on both sides of the line. That is 4.5 on both sides. Then I connected it back using the curved part of the ruler to connect that at the inner thigh area, and then this other side I connected it to the length. And here is what we have so far, guys. Just ignore the line I have on the neckline over there. I won't be going with that. Okay, so now for the back pattern, you're going to measure everything you have over here at the crotch extension, which is 2.5, and you're going to be multiplying that by 2 to get the center back line. So here I went ahead to mark 5 inches. It's supposed to be 5 inches, but I added 0.5 just to be on the safe side. Then I went ahead to take my measurements. This is just a repetition of what we did at the front. The only difference that we're going to be having for this back line is the difference in the waist, shoulder to waist measurements, because the front shoulder to waist is longer than the back shoulder to waist. And I went ahead to take my waist measurements this time around, which gave me 14.5 inches. So the next thing I'll be doing is to mark out my hip line. So to get this accurately, just go to your front draft and measure your waist to hip. So whatever you have on the waist to hip line is what you will take on the back waistline down to the hip line. So if you're having 8 inches from your front waist to hip, that is what you will mark from the waist down to get your hip line. Next is the crotch depth. So to get the crotch depth, also you go to your front pattern and take the measurement you have from the waist down to the crotch, in which mine is 10.75, and that is what I marked on the back pattern. So I went ahead to label the lines which I just wrote out. And I went to take my crotch to mid-thigh measurements on the front and mark that down. I had 6.5, so I marked that down on the back pattern as well. So I wrote that out and labeled it as my mid-thigh for the back. Alright, so over here on this crotch area over here, don't forget we had 2.5 inches. So I'm going to multiply it by 2, which is going to give me 5, then mark that out as a back. So this will serve as a crotch extension for the back pattern. I'm going to take my measurements on the back bodies. So before that, we're going to be doing some tightening on the waistline to avoid zipper bulges. So I took 0.75 inches on the waistline and blended it into the neckline. Then I went ahead to take my measurements from that line. So I took my bust circumference divided by 4, which gave me 8.75. Then from that point also, I took my waist measurement plus 1 inch for that. Over here, from the first line which we have, I took my hip measurements divided by 4, connected them like so. Alright, so the next thing we're going to be doing here now is to take the whole measurement crotch area on the front. So before we do anything over here, I'm just going to go ahead and mark out the front crotch extension also on the back. Then take my thigh measurements, which is 11 plus half inch for ease. So I'm just duplicating what I have on the front pattern over here. Then I connected it back to the hip line. So what we have over here to the front crotch extension on the back, you're going to divide it into 2 to get a midpoint.
and
take it down all the way to the mid-thigh area also. Then connect them together. We're going to be taking the front mid-thigh measurements on the back also. Guys, don't forget when you're drafting trouser, you need the front pattern to draft the back. So basically that's what we're doing. I went ahead to divide what I have over there, just duplicating what I have on the front pattern to the back pattern. Then connected them together. Then I went ahead to use dotted lines to connect this first crotch extension. So this will serve as a guideline for the back crotch extension. So from that point, I went ahead to mark 1 inch out. Then I will be connecting it to the back crotch extension. Now over here, I'm going to go ahead and measure what I have at the inner thigh area over here and compare with what I have at the back. So for that part, I have 6.5. Then here, I have more than 6.5. So I shorten the back crotch extension. So the main reason we did this is so that the inner thigh, the back inner thigh, when sewing, will not be longer than the front inner thigh. Okay, guys, we used half of what we have on the crotch extension to get this curve over here, but for the back I'll be using 2 inches to get this point. So if you're on the bigger side, you can use 2.5 inches to make room for the butt to sit. Okay, so for me I used 2 inches marked out, so I'll be connecting the 2 inches back to my waistline. So I'm just trying to get a right curve. So I used the straight line and stopped like 2 inches away from the marked points. Then here I'm using the curved part of the multipurpose curve. Then at this point, it was a bit difficult to join with the multipurpose curve. So I had to get my hip curve to connect it. Alright, so now that I'm done with the curve, I'm going to go to the line which I have, my armhole line, and mark the midpoint and connect that to the measurement which I have on the chest line.
on the thigh line here, I'm going to be marking 2 inches, which will serve as the hem allowance, and I'm going to just roll a line across that. And I'm going to cut through the line. Now after cutting through, I'm going to go ahead now and fold in the hemming allowance which was added before cutting out the back pattern, so as to avoid shortage of material when turning the hem. I'm going to go ahead now and label this as the back piece. Alright, so after labeling, I'm going to connect the hip line which I have over there, the line which I have at the hip. I'm going to extend it all the way to the curve on the back like that, then slash it through. The reason why I'm slashing through is because I want to make enough room for the butt to sit in. So I'm going to be using 1.75 for the spread out. So if you're on the bigger side, you can use about 2 inches. You can use 2 inches, you can use 2.5 inches for the spread out. But for me, because I'm on the smaller side, I decided to use 1.75. I can actually use 1.5, or here I'm going with 1.75. I'm just going to mark 1.75 now in between the slash. Alright, so I'm going to mark 1.75, then tape down the lower part of this opening which I have, then mark 1.75 and tape this one all the way through and bring the upper part to the 1.75 which was marked, and I'm going to go ahead and tape down. Then after taping, I'm just going to go ahead and cut it out. So here it is after cutting, as you can see.
On the front pattern, I went ahead to slash through one of the dark lines on the bust line. Then I creased it, that is, I placed it directly on the other dark line. And I'm going to reconnect my waist to chest line to remove any excess which I have on the pattern. Then cut out the excess and retape it back together. So after cutting out the excess, I'm going to retape the darts back together before cutting on the fabric. I'm just going to label this as the front pattern, and I'm going to compare, check my inner thigh area and see if they align. So on the back pattern, I have my hemming allowance, but I don't on the front, so that's why I folded that part in. Now here we're going to get the neckline. Since it's an off shoulder, so I decided to go off by 4.5 inches to draw the line across this point. Then I'm going to cut out and take my nipple to nipple measurement on that point of the neckline. So my nipple to nipple is 3.75. So I'm just going to mark that, and I'm going to add extra 1 inch. Then on the chest area, I went down by, on the chest line there, I went down by 0.5 inch down the armhole on the chest line. And I'm going to go ahead to connect them together. So after this connection, I'm just going to go ahead and cut it out. So after cutting out, I'm going to go back to the center front and mark down 6 inches
As the neck depth, connect it to the armhole and cut out.
Now guys, I'm going to repeat the same thing I did on the front pattern to the back. From the back pattern now, I'm going to go off by 4.5 inches. I took my nipple to nipple measurements from the point and I added 1 inch also. Then went down here also by 0.5 and connected those 2 points. And next I went to determine the neck depth of the back neckline. So I also marked 6 inches like I did for the front. I got these 2 yards of Duchess which I'll be using. Alright, so I went ahead to fold into 2. I fold just enough to cut out the front pattern with the seam allowances which I want to add. After placing my front pattern on the fabric, I went ahead to hold it in place with my curve. So if you have a pin around, you can go ahead and use a pin. Now over there at the hemline, I'm marking 2 inches as the hemming allowance, and here on the side, I marked 0.75 as my seam allowance. Now if you like, you can do more than 0.75 on the side. You can do 1, you can do 2. So here on the armhole area, I went ahead to add ½ inch. The neckline also, I added ½ inch seam allowance, and at the center front also, I went ahead to mark ½ inch seam allowance. And when I got to the crotch area, the inner thigh area, I added 0.75 like I did on the side. Now all through here, I'm adding 0.75 at that point. Then I went ahead to cut out. Now guys, don't forget, before cutting, make sure you fold the hem of your fabric. Alright, so I'm done with the cutting of the front pattern. Let's move ahead to the back pattern. Now I have my back piece placed on my fabric. So here I went ahead to mark to cut out with 0.75 at the inner thigh area, and here I'm going with ½ inch, but I'm going to stop when I get to the hip line and mark out 1 inch from that point as the zipper allowance. Now on this side also I went ahead to add 0.75 same allowance like we did at the front. The only difference here is that from the hip line we have 1 inch zipper allowance. So here I'm just cutting out the other side of the back. Now here is it after cutting. So after cutting it out, I have my 2 back piece ready, and I decided to go lower than what I have at the front for the neckline. So I went lower by 8.5 inches. So here I have my back piece and then the front piece ready. Now for the front piece, I have pinned these two together as you can see. So I'm going to go ahead now and sew along the center front with ½ inch seam allowance which was added. Now on the center back also, I went ahead to mark out 1 inch which I added as the zipper allowance all the way to that point. Then I continued with ½ inch down to the crotch area, to the back crotch area. Alright, so after pinning, I'm gonna place my back pattern on the fabric and pick the midpoint in between the spread which I have over here. So the midpoint is this point. So I'm going to take this to the machine and stitch from that midpoint all the way to the crotch area. And here my zipper allowance, I'm just going to go ahead now and use pin to hold it in place. I'm not going to stitch that down. Okay, so I'm done pinning, so I'm going to go ahead and stitch down this area. Now here I have my front pattern. I've gone ahead to stitch the center front together. Also for the back piece, I've stitched from the hip all the way to the crotch area. And here is what the outer part looks like. Now I'm just gonna turn it over to the wrong side of the fabric and trim off any excess which I might have on the crotch area. Alright, so next up is the cutting of the bias, which I'll be using to pipe the front bodies and the back bodies. So here I have my front bodies. So I measured around the neck. I have 13.75 thereabouts. So I'm gonna take a piece of fabric, fold it on bias like this, and make sure I have up to 14 inches over there and cut out. Alright, so after cutting out this part which I cut out right now, I'm going to take the measurement which I had when measuring on the front bodice, which was 13 inches, and then I'm going to measure the width of 1.25 to cut out the bias. So this will serve as the bias for the front. And for the back also, because we have a zipper allowance dividing the back piece into two, I'll be cutting 2 bias for the back bodies. So I'm going to go ahead and take my measurements of the back bodies until the zipper allowance which I have. Then I went ahead to cut out my bias using width of 1.25 inches. So I went ahead to cut out 2. All right, so next up, I'm going to take my front bias and use it to pipe the front bodies. Now, after piping the front piece and the back piece of my bodies with the bias, so the next thing I'm going to do now is to join the inner thigh area, that is the crotch area of both front and back. I pin down from the crotch area down to the mid thigh area. Now this part is the inner thigh area which we're going to be joining together. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch with the 0.75 seam allowance which was added. Now after stitching, here is what I have, as you can see. Now the next thing I'll be doing is to add my darts, is to take my darts on both front and back. So here I folded my front piece into two, and here I'm just transferring the darts which I have to the front piece. Transferred it to both sides of the front piece.
Then I went on to transfer the darts to the back bodies as well.
Now after stitching, here is what the inner part of the back piece looks like, as you can see, and here is what the front piece also looks like. Now for this side dart over here, I stopped my stitch 1 inch away from the bust line. As you can see, there's a distance. So I did this because I don't want it to be pointy around the nipple area. So that's why I stopped at 1 inch before the nipple area. Now the next thing I'll be doing is to join the sides together and pin all the way down
On one side and pin the other side also. Then stitch with the 0.75 inch which was added as the same allowance. Alright, so here it is after stitching. You can see how it looks like. I gave it a light press after stitching, and this is what I have. So here is what the back looks like. Alright, so for the sleeve, I'm working with length of 27 inches and width of 24 inches. So I'm just going to go ahead and fold this into two like this, fold it over and pin down one end. Alright, so after pinning, I'm going to bring my fabric, the jumpsuit, and I'm going to place it directly very close to the edge over here. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead now and take the measurement of what I have on the sleeve. So I have about 6.5 inches. So over here, I'm going to go ahead now from the top of the sleeve and mark about 1 inch, which will be serving as the casing where I'll be inserting the elastic band to. And then on this other side, I'm going to mark 1 inch, which will be serving as the seam allowance to close up the sleeve on the sides. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead now and fold this way. This is how I'll be folding it for the encasing of the elastic. So placing my sleeve from the in between the two lines, but making sure it's touching those two lines which I just marked, I'm going to go ahead now and use my chalk to draw out the outline of the armhole. So I'm just going to trace out the outline of the armhole on the sleeve. And after that, I'm going to go ahead and cut out. So from this top part, I'm just going to fold it in and cut out my armhole on the sleeve. So after cutting from that same line at this point now, I'm just going to fold that in so we won't get confused. Since I went up by 4.5 on the main body, so I went up by 4.5 to take my 3/4 sleeve of 18 inches. Then I added extra 4 inches. And that will be the line of the point where I'll be fixing the second elastic to. So I'm just going to give it a notch at the edge over here. Alright, so moving on to the next part on the sleeve, what I'm going to do is to take one part of the sleeve like this, trim off any rough edge. Then I'm going to go ahead and fold this over like this, so I will have a spacing in between to
insert my elastic too. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch down. Now after stitching down, this is what I have. As you can see, this is what it looks like. So the 22 inches which was marked, that is the other part where the elastic is going to be, I went ahead to extend the line over and I folded it into two like this. Then I'm going to pin it down. After pinning down, I'll go ahead and stitch on it using 0.5 inch all the way to that end. So after stitching, this is what we have. You can see we have a casing for the elastic to be inserted in. So what I will do now is to flip this over to the top part of the sleeve like this. Then I'm going to pin it down. Then I'm going to go ahead now and stitch at the tip. So here it is after stitching. The casing for the elastic now is ready. Here is what the outer part looks like. And this opening over here is where I'll be inserting the elastic from all the way to the other end. So the opening for the top part is for the first elastic and then the other is for the second elastic. So this is the M part of the sleeve. I'm going to go ahead and stitch that down. Now to insert the elastic, I'll be using this safety pin to do that. So for the upper part over here, the elastic which I'll be inserting, because I want it to be a bit firm, not too loose and not too tight on me, I got elastic of 5 inches long. So I'm going to just use the safety pin to insert it all the way. Here, I'm making sure I'm pushing the elastic in gently so as not to drag everything at the end over here, I'm just going to go ahead and pin down the elastic down to the sleeve at this point before any further insertion. Then I continue the insertion of the elastic up until I get to the other end of the opening. Then I'm going to push this in till I have the tip exactly at the opening. Then pin it down like so. Then I'll take it to my machine and stitch on the side and stitch also on the other side to keep it in place. I'll be using elastic of 7.5 inches which I got by taking it round my wrist. As you can see, it's just a perfect fit. I went ahead to insert this, then stitch it down in place, then sew on the 1-inch seam allowance which I have on the sleeve. Now after sewing on the allowance which I have on the sleeve, I've gone ahead to stitch it down. So this is what the inner part looks like, as you can see. Next thing I'll be doing now is to join it to the bodies of the jumpsuits, as you can see. So I went ahead to pin it down on the armhole area while making sure that the right side of the sleeve is placed directly on the right side of the main bodies. I'm going to go ahead and pin it down all the way to the underarm area on the front bodies. And also pin down at the back, starting from the armhole down to the underarm area. Then after pinning down, I'm going to go ahead and stitch on the machine with 0.5 inch allowance. And after stitching one part of the sleeve down, I'm going to go ahead and repeat what I did for this side to the other parts also of the sleeve. And guys, here is the final outcome, the final look of the play suits. What do you think, guys? Let me know what you think. If you find it helpful, let me know. And if you're gonna try it out also, I'd like to know. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.